At this juncture in the 2024 presidential election, there are no better candidates that have shown themselves to be opponents of the deep state and warriors for freedom than President Donald Trump and presidential candidate Vivek Ramaswamy. Before I begin my analysis, I will say this. I am biased towards Vivek. Vivek is fresh, he's young, he's also principled, convicted, and a lot of his ideas are founded on sound philosophy. And if any of you know anything about Christian Watson, you know that I am someone who prides rational discourse and philosophy in our political conversations, not just because I want people to feel smart, but because I want Americans to get back to the way of thinking that our founders and the founding generation had so many years ago, which set our nation into motion. Now, when I say that both of these candidates oppose the deep state, I understand what the initial reaction from the unenlightened will be. Many people will immediately click off this video and say the deep state is some right-wing conspiracy that has no merit to it. Others who may be sympathetic may even say that I'm being sensational and trying to drum up views. But unfortunately, the truth is this. The deep state goes by many names in the American political system, and it is unfortunately quite real. And in order to explain how these two gentlemen fight the deep state and fight it well, I must first explain to you what the deep state actually is. The deep state goes by many names, as I mentioned before, but it is oftentimes called the administrative state. And the administrative state, the deep state, this basically the second government inside of our government, is almost as old as many of the departments we have in our government today. It's not as old as our country. It's about 100+ years old. But this idea was first conceived in the late 1880s, early 1900s, during the heyday of the progressive era. Indeed, people like Woodrow Wilson, President of the United States, or Frank Goodenow were all people in the progressive era who actually were architects of this administrative state. And some of the more prominent historical examples of the administrative state include the New Deal, which is oftentimes lauded by historians of progressive orientation as a program which saved America from the Great Depression and the throes of economic, economic poverty. The Great Society, which established the welfare state in America. The Department of Education, which essentially micromanages education or educational funds and educational standards to states across the country. There are just more than one example of what it means to have an administrative state or a deep state. And this administrative state is founded off the idea that there is a separation, as Woodrow Wilson put it, between administration and politics. So the idea is this. Politics has to do with the debates around the Constitution and principles and how government should work. Administration has to do with how the government is actually practically ran. In Woodrow Wilson's essay, The Study of Administration, that he wrote in 1887, before he occupied the White House, he said the following thing about administration and government. He said, "The weightier debates of constitutional principle are even yet by no means concluded, but they are no longer of more immediate practical moment than questions of administration. It is getting to be harder to run a constitution than to frame one. There is scarcely a single duty of government which was once simple, which is not now complex. Government once had but a few masters. It now has scores of masters. Majorities formerly only underwent government. They now conduct government. Where government once might follow the whims of a court, it must now follow the views of a nation." Do you see what Woodrow Wilson was championing here, my friends? This one sentiment has caused so many problems in the American political system. From the FBI politically and selectively weaponizing themselves against certain people, like President Trump, or whether it be the CIA doing all those kind of illegal operations at black sites around the world and then covering it up, the waterboarding, the Department of Education coming in and micromanaging education and having these universal standards called Common Core by which they try to assess the value of every student by. So many things that we have seen. The ATF coming in and saying you can't have this kind of gun or this kind of gun because it goes against our arbitrary regulations with no basis in the Constitution. Almost every unconstitutional behavior over the past 120+ years, it's been over 120+ years since this was written, has flowed from this single idea. Listen closely. The deep state is just the idea that administration, how the government is run, should be separate from political debates. Now, this poses a problem. If how the government is run is separate from political debates, even though the process of running the government is itself inherently political, then how do you hold these administrators accountable? Well, according to Woodrow Wilson, the Constitution's not important, first principles don't matter, philosophy doesn't matter, what matters are majorities, and what matters are how you actually make the machine work. So how the machine works is not important for Wilson, or the progressives, or the supporters of the administrative state, but the fact that the machine works according to the whims of those who run it, that's what matters. The moment you embrace this mentality is the moment you get rid of the idea that America has 3 branches of government and installs a 4th one that overrides every single one of those. There's an even more prescient example of this in another one of Wilson's sentiments. Wilson said, very simply here, that courts, he actually undermined the role of courts. Now, we understand that courts are actually a part of the government. They are a branch of government that is meant to correct the excesses of either of the executive or legislative branch. And he said there that, of course, where government once might follow the whims of a court, it must follow the views of a nation. So principles, standards don't matter. But what the majority want at any given time, that's what matters. This is the belief of the people who believe in the deep state and the administrative state. And so we have to ask ourselves this question. How does this administrative state manifest today? Very, very simply. The administrative state manifests in the interest of the administrators, basically people like the CIA, the FBI, ATF, the DOJ, overriding what is true and what is correct, overriding the importance of first principles. Let me give you guys a very basic example. So President Trump right now is being indicted for allegedly mishandling classified information, when anyone who actually has done the research, done the reading, understands that classified information is either classified or unclassified at the behest of the president. The Presidential Records Act says this. There is Supreme Court precedent that actually says that authorization and classification are both 2 categories that serve exclusively at the whims of the president. And so essentially, the president has the ability, by merely waving his hand, by holding up his hand, by merely breathing or doing whatever else he wants to do, to declassify or reclassify documents at his will. It has been tradition for presidents and for people like Hillary Clinton, Barack Obama, Mike Pence to take classified documents and, by the way, put them in more compromising positions than President Trump did. It's been tradition to do that. And so when you have a legal system that doesn't follow not only its own basic norms, but precedents set by long-standing court decisions, you don't have a system that cares about what the courts think or what principles think. As Wilson says, you have a system that cares about what people who run it think. And regardless of the will of the people, regardless of what is true and what is correct, and regardless of this process that is established for good governance, that doesn't matter. What matters is, what do people, the administrators, think? Which is one of the reasons why you have the CIA, you have the FBI, you have all these weird groups making these odd arguments. The DOJ, to be specific, saying that classification stands independent of the president, and the president has to abide by classification rules when the rules exist to serve him. So they're saying the president has to abide by their rules when they, as members of the executive branch, also exist to serve him. Do you see how this tension between administration and politics is kind of coming up in our culture? The only way you can actually believe the Trump indictment is if you believe the administrators have more power, should have more power and authority over the president, who actually has the express authority over so many of these things. I can keep going on. The fact that, again, as I mentioned, the ATF is able to arbitrarily set new rules for the purchase and maintenance of firearms, really without any oversight from the courts, without any oversight from Congress, is another example of the administrators making the rules against the principles the nation was founded upon. Vivek Ramaswamy has outlined a very specific plan to not only attack the rule-making tyrants that run our government, but also to abolish several of these agencies from which this administrative mentality flows. That is powerful.
We have to shut down the administrative state as it exists. Take a government agency that should have never existed, like the U.S. Department of Education. okay? I'm not going to tell you I'm going to reform that beast. You can't reform the beast. You have to kill it. You have to shut it down. We're done with the Department of Education. You then go over to the one we're talking about today, the FBI. This should not exist. It was corrupt in 1960. The same education, the same FBI that threatened Martin Luther King Jr. with suicide as a corrupt body is now targeting Donald Trump and its political opponents today. We will not tame that beast. We will kill it. We will shut it down. This is what it means to be an American.
Donald Trump, having been antagonized and attacked by them, and having been skeptical of them during his first term. Remember, Steve Bannon, his advisor, came in saying we have to abolish the administrative state. Unfortunately, Trump didn't do it. But having learned more and knowing more now, Trump is now incentivized and has planned to go in and completely and utterly rearrange how this government is run, which is one of the reasons they don't want him to win. They being the administrative state and the political class and the establishmentarians in D.C., who actually benefit from this perverse separation between administration and politics, between principle and action, principle and procedure. The separation between principle and procedure, my friends, as I demonstrated, has actually been quite destructive to the American way of life in our government. When your congressperson has little control over if a government agency can just come in and take your firearms from you, you no longer have a representative government. When you have a CIA, which is capable of doing illegal things in the name of national security, when you have an NSA that is capable of coming in, taking your information without due process, or if they get due process, they go to a FISA court, which behind the veil of secrecy, rubber stamps everything they do, you don't have a representative government. You don't have a constitutional republic. And a politician who refuses to go into that territory and question that and criticize that and vow to get rid of it is not serving the interests of the American public. They are serving the interests of God knows who, they who occupy the cloakrooms of DC. And that is one of the reasons why I think Vivek and Trump are quite significant in this moment. Great men are not great merely because they are distinctive. Great men are great when they are willing to stand on their own 2 feet and say things that may not be popular, but are necessary and true, and they're willing to take the slings and take the arrows for it. Many may say, what about RFK Jr.? That's a separate conversation. We'll talk about that later. But I know for a fact that someone with the mentality of Vivek Ramaswamy or President Trump, or both of them together, would have the ability to dramatically transform things. Because they don't exist to serve the status quo. They exist to bring forth a new order. In Vivek's case, he talks about a cultural revolution in America. I talk about a revolution of the mind. I want people to think more, to debate more, to study more. But at this point, a presidential candidate who understands that not all solutions come from Washington, and not all solutions must come from Washington, and the structure of how Washington is run quite literally excludes certain solutions that would otherwise be considered. When a presidential candidate understands that and they work to get rid of those systems and structures, they are someone who is keenly aware of how the country is actually run and is keenly aware of where the real rot lies. Think about this. In America right now, you have a Pentagon which has thousands of employees. This is confirmed by Newsweek, by the way. Thousands of employees and agents in corporations and institutions across America. For what purpose? The Pentagon is supposed to stand for national defense, but they have literally infiltrated so many industries in America, according to a Newsweek whistleblower report. For what purpose? Again, who made that decision? Who chose this? Who elected the people in the Pentagon to be able to do this? That is, not only is there so many legal questions that have to be asked, there's moral questions as well, and there's questions of the Constitution that are not considered in this moment. Great men, no matter what you think of them personally, are they who have the ability to see these problems, or see the problems like them, and then act towards fixing them in a manner that will be holistic and powerful. That's why I think when Vivek Ramaswamy says he's going to pardon President Trump, people say that he's being a puppet. No, what he's doing is saying on the basis of philosophical principle, This indictment should never happen. It's shot illegally, and it only is justified by a legal standard which says that the administrative state, not the President of the United States, but the administrative state, not the duly elected, constitutionally appointed officer of the country, but the administrative state has the authority over what's classified and what's not classified. Any candidate who cares about our country should be saying that's a sham, that's wrong. But some candidates, like Chris Christie and DeSantis and others, I'll say the names, believe that it's politically convenient for them to see that ship, the Trump ship, go down. And so what will they do? They either will say nothing, or they'll do what Tim Scott says and said, I won't get into hypotheticals. I don't assume bad faith on the part of all these people, but I do say this. A politician is meant to serve the interest of the country, and those interests are codified in the Constitution. The Constitution has a broader moral theory of natural law beneath it that gives it power and generates its structure. And if a politician cannot be obedient to those subterranean principles, they have no business occupying the halls of power in this country ever. And right now, the only two people I've seen in the race who are willing to even go back to those principles and reinforce them through their behavior is Ramaswamy and Trump. My friends, be very careful this election. Understand that not all is not what it seems. There is a massive power structure that runs the government, that runs the country in ways that your congressperson will never even tell you, or they don't even know about themselves, or if they know about it, turn a blind eye to it, with few exceptions. We must reverse course. We must bind administration and politics back together, and we must get rid of the structure that has come forth from this fundamentally anti-American idea that management is more important than principle. Because if principle goes away, nothing else matters. If principle goes away, nothing else can be said. If principle goes away, you have to ask yourselves, how in the world can we have a just government or a just society? Newsflash, we can't. My friends, like this video, subscribe to this channel, share this video, comment on this video. I love you guys so much, and please stay pensive. Bye, guys.